Stanford University.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm Mimi Coulter. I'm the Deputy University Librarian here at Stanford. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this fantastic evening and this event featuring our Stanford alum, accomplished journalist, and one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, Gretchen Carlson. Gretchen, welcome back to the farm. We're happy to have you. So we are here today to celebrate Gretchen's newest publication, Be Fierce, Stop Harassment, and Take Your Power Back. And you should all have your own copy, and make sure you get one if you've somehow missed it on the way in. We're really thrilled to be part of her book tour, and as she is taking her message of workplace empowerment to colleges around the country. In 2016, Gretchen became the face of sexual harassment in the workplace, as she was standing strong in her determination to promote a safe working environment for all women. And after she spoke out, Gretchen became the voice of the voiceless. Be Fierce shares not only Gretchen's personal experience, but also powerful stories from the thousands of women who have reached out to her and who refuse to submit to intimidation of any kind. So, Joining Gretchen on stage will be Professor Shelley Correll. Shelley is Professor of Sociology and Organizational Behavior here at Stanford with expertise in the area of gender, workplace dynamics, and organizational culture. And she's also the Barbara D. Finberg Director of the Clayman Institute in Gender Research. We're really thrilled to have her here as well, and thank you for co-sponsoring this event with us in the libraries. So welcome to you both, and I'll let you get started.
So welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a great audience here on a rainy day in California. And thank you especially to you, Gretchen, for making the time to be here with us today.
Well, I would not have missed Stanford, of course, on my list as a former student here. And I had the great pleasure of coming a little bit earlier today and bringing my 14-year-old daughter with me. Where did you go? Oh, right there.
She's hiding.
And so not to make her too nervous about already applying to college, she's only in 9th grade, but I wanted her to be able to see the great place that I had the opportunity to come from, a small town in Minnesota. And I had the opportunity to choose between Yale and Stanford, and I went to visit Yale, and it was rainy. And the young student who took me around said, all we do is study the whole time. And you know, I loved studying, I really did. And I was a really serious student, but then my parents took me directly here, and there were all these people windsurfing, and they were studying under palm trees in February, and I was like, okay, I have to come to this place. So it's made me a wimp with cold weather, because those 4 years of California made me not so strong with the cold weather growing up in Minnesota, but it was such an amazing experience. And I'm so glad to be able to show it to my daughter today. So thanks for having me.
So we want to talk obviously mostly about the book, but just a little bit more about your experiences at Stanford. Were there particular activities or courses that you took while you were a student here that stand out as memorable to you?
Yeah, I was sharing earlier today with the people taking us on the tour that the one thing I loved about Stanford was you didn't have to declare your major till you were junior, because I am interested in so many things. And if you look at my life since college and before college, it's proven to be true. I mean, it's worked in this sort of zigzag way. So I started out in Minnesota as an incredibly serious classical violinist, and that was going to be my career. And then I burned out and I quit when I was 17 because I was interested in just too many other things. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to Stanford, I declared a million different majors because I could, right? And I didn't have to make a decision. I tell young people this all the time. If you don't already know what your passion is, it's fine. Because look at what happened in my life. So I ended up becoming an organizational behavior major after having about 20 before that. And so I was supposed to be a corporate consultant or a problem solver. And then I ended up getting into TV. And then I was going to be a lawyer, and then whoever thought I'd be the face of sexual harassment. So, honestly, that's not something you predict or plan on. But the one constant in my life has been that when there is a challenge in front of me, I go for it, and I work incredibly hard. And I think specifically on this issue, I could have easily just gone home after my case settled and never done anything else with it ever again, but that wouldn't be the person that I am, and it wouldn't be the right thing to have done in trying to help other people. I will say that my other great there's so many great memories about Stanford, but when I came back, I stopped out of school and was gone from Stanford for more than 2 years. And when I came back, I took several feminist studies courses. And it was, those are the classes that I remember the most, maybe because they were the most recent. But I had been Miss America. And I came back and took all these feminist studies courses. And the reason I share that with you is because that's who I really am and have always been. And I've always been a huge proponent of women. Come full circle, I just took on, as my 6th or 7th job right now, in a volunteer capacity, I'm the new executive chairwoman of the Miss America organization. So I plan to bring my entire fierce movement to that organization. So stay tuned for changes. So life works in mysterious ways, right? It's what I was saying, my long-winded answer of saying, you know, how if you don't know what you're doing in your life right now, it doesn't matter because somehow it will all work out.
I found the book so inspiring, and I was really touched by all of the stories you tell of once your sexual harassment surfaced, that women were coming up to you and telling you their stories and thanking you for writing the book. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, and if that's what galvanized you to go ahead and write the book.
Yes, because how could I have known what was going to happen the next second or the next hour or the next day after I did what I did? You know, back then there was no Me Too movement, there was no Time's Up. It was me alone taking on an incredibly powerful person. And really what buoyed my spirits and my desire to continue on this mission was all these women who reached out to me. And at first it started with dozens, and then it moved to hundreds. I was sharing backstage that in being from Minnesota, my parents always told me to respond to everyone and write handwritten thank you notes. And so here I was responding to all these women, right? And then I started printing off their stories in my home office, and they were creating huge piles, and then it got into the thousands, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this, you know, keep up with all these women. But it made me realize, oh my gosh, this is a pervasive epidemic. And it crossed every socioeconomic line and every profession. And what they said to me was pretty consistent. Thank you for being the voice for the voiceless. And they felt a sense of victory through what happened to me, because my story was one of the very first in a long time where they saw that there were consequences for the perpetrator. And so I think what happened is that more and more women felt courageous and brave enough to come forward and tell their stories because they thought to themselves, wow, maybe I will be believed. Imagine that. Yeah. And so I wrote the book to honor all those women who never had that chance. Here's the scary stat. 99.9% of all those women who reached out to me never worked in their chosen profession ever again. And that's outrageous. And to think that that was simply because they had mustered up the courage to come forward before this movement. And they were promptly blacklisted, demoted, and fired. And the perpetrator gets to stay on the job. That was pretty much the pattern for almost all of them. So we have all these educated, successful, smart women who aren't working in their chosen professions anymore. And in many cases, they can never tell you why, because they either signed settlements, right, which keep women secret, or they have arbitration clauses in their employment contracts, which I'm fighting on the Hill to change. And that also keeps the issue secret. What I've been saying to companies is, you should be hiring back all these amazing women who had their careers cut short and ended for no fault of their own. Imagine the goodwill that a company would get if they would hire back a woman who they had wronged. So that's my next goal, getting all those women back to work.
Both goodwill and good talent they would have.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And the stories, too, really come from a diverse set of perspectives. And we know that sexual harassment affects women differently depending on industry, their race, their sexuality. What did you learn from interviewing so many diverse or having stories told from so many diverse kind of women in the book?
I think it was just really painful to see how pervasive it was, because I didn't even know that, when I did what I did. I think we had always heard a lot about Wall Street bankers.
Yeah.
But now we've had this awakening to realize that it's waitresses, and it's members of our military, and it's teachers. And I heard from oil rig operators. I mean, it's everywhere. And one of the biggest questions that I received at the beginning, and still to this day, was, okay, well, you might have had the resources to hire good lawyers, and you had a national platform and being known on television for your case, but what about the single mom working 2 jobs and just trying to make ends meet? What can she do? And you know, I had a lot of sleepless nights over that question because I didn't have a good answer for it. So one of the things that I have done over the last 20 months is I set up a fund called the Gift of Courage Fund to give financial grants to organizations that are already empowering women, girls, and boys. And the largest grant that I gave in recent time was to create the Gretchen Carlson Leadership Initiative for underprivileged women. And what this is a 9-city tour, 3 days of workshops in each city where underserved women can come and learn how to get help with sexual harassment, domestic violence, and how to have a voice civically and politically. And so far we've done 3 cities, and it's been amazingly successful. By the end of the 3 days, we've had some women who didn't want to say a word at the beginning, who by the end of the 3 days say that they're running for office.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And so it's my small way of providing a solution for that question. We have a lot more work to do, but at least I know that I'm providing a beginning for those women who never really had a chance any other way.
Yeah. I think the more people that speak out too, it makes it, it makes it easier for all kinds of women to be able to step forward.
Yeah, because one thing I found out is I aptly named my fund Gift of Courage, because what I found out is the gift of courage is contagious. And so the more that you pass it along and pass it along and pass it along, you form this collective voice. And that's what we're experiencing right now, whatever weather term you want to use, tidal wave, tsunami. I like to call it a cultural revolution. And it's amazing, and you would know more about this than me and your expertise, but the idea that we're seeing so much change in such a short period of time, people will write about this for years to come.
Oh, sure, sure.
Right? Because cultural revolutions don't happen in 20 months.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yes. So how do you think your work fits into the larger Me Too movement, the sort of increase in feminist activism? How does the book fit into that larger context, or how do you hope it does?
I think it's part of the entire movement, right? But fixing this issue is a tangled web. So it makes it more difficult to fix because it's not just one solution. So I write a lot about this in the book. It's changing the laws, right? I will say that in December, I'm very proud to announce that we introduced our bill in the House and the Senate, and it's bipartisan. Because I wasn't going to put my name and my face on any kind of a mission unless I thought it actually could pass. And that's the only way we can get it passed. So imagine if we can actually pass this in a bipartisan fashion for women. And then we have to get it to the president's desk and get him to sign it. But we have a strategy for that too. So that's one piece of the puzzle, is changing the laws. Then it's how do we report sexual harassment in the workplace? Is HR necessarily the best place to go? Or is it a conflict of interest? So we need to examine that. Maybe we should have an independent contractor, an ombudsman of sorts. So it's that facet. It's how we raise our children. I have a whole chapter on parenting. And I ask parents to take a pledge for gender equity. And it can be really subtle. I've even found myself changing the way that I parent and things that I say at home after my own story broke. It's needing men to help us. I ended up writing an entire chapter on men who defend, never intending to, but so many men reached out to me after my story broke. And in my unscientific study on the streets of New York City, more men stopped me than women to shake my hand and say, thank you for my daughters. And so many men reached out to me who were already doing great work for gender equity in the workplace. And I wanted to celebrate them. So what I found out is that the majority of men want safe working environments for women. So it's these random jerks we got to get rid of. And so I wanted to honor these men. I feel like the final tipping point in this revolution will actually be men and women, but predominantly men who stop being enablers and bystanders and become allies. What I mean by that is, instead of just seeing stuff and knowing about stuff and not doing anything, to summon up the same amount of courage that women somehow find to come forward as victims, and actually say at that moment in time, don't you ever speak to that woman like that ever again. Stop being a bystander and become an ally. Because you know what? That'll stop it in its place. So to me, that will be the final tipping point. And if that doesn't happen, I don't know if we will totally solve this issue.
You also write in the book about some of the misperceptions that's about sexual harassment that keep us stuck where we are. And I wonder what you think the biggest misperception is.
Oh gosh, well, they're all equal in my mind. That women are troublemakers, that they just can't get along with the boys. You know, we've had other women work here before and they didn't have a problem, right? That's number two, that somehow we bring it on ourselves by the way we dress or the makeup that we wear. And here's what I found out. You can have on hospital scrubs, army fatigues, or a skirt. It doesn't matter. It's not your fault. Number three, that women bring about claims because they want to get famous and be rich. Yeah, because it was so fun for me to come forward and be completely maligned and had my entire career thrown out before me as just a troublemaker. The case I love to point to about that really defied that was Taylor Swift last summer. Probably, arguably, one of the most rich, famous singers of our time. So she didn't need the money. And she brought a case for $1 against a man who had groped her during a photo shoot, a photo line underneath her skirt. And she was so fantastic when she testified. You should go back and read her testimony, actually. And so she defied that whole myth that you just do it to become rich and famous. I think that part of this cultural revolution is seeing a lot of those myths start to erode, right? So women are actually being believed now. Mm-hmm. And the perpetrators are being terminated immediately, and instead of saying, oh, she got fired because her ratings sucked, they're actually issuing apologies right away. I mean, that is huge. It is. I mean, I even amaze myself when I say, my gosh, I can't believe that I'm witnessing this actually happening.
This was really surprising to me, and it seemed like it came out of nowhere, and I wonder if it was surprising to you that the Me Too movement started and just kind of took off after years of feeling like there was just, we weren't going to crack this.
Well, so after my story broke, there were a couple other blips, There was Susan Fowler at Uber. Yeah, right. There was the Kay Jeweler case where they were all shoved into secrecy through arbitration as well, but they broke their NDAs and came forward. There were a smattering of other cases, and then the floodgates just opened. And it was 2 weeks before my book came out in October, and I can still see myself sitting in my hotel room in Dallas where I was speaking. And I actually had a reporter say to me, did you plan your book with this movement? I was like,
you said you're a planner. So.
Yeah, well, I am a planner, but wow, that would have been, I'd be doing something else if I was able to predict that. But no, it just happened to be, amazing timing. But more important than anything else was that it really opened the floodgates. Mm-hmm. And my greatest hope is that it doesn't end there, because I know too much about all these other women out there. And my greatest hope is that the every woman story also gets told, that it's not just well-known journalists and Hollywood actresses and people on the Hill, that it is also the waitress and the teacher, et cetera. And I still hear from all these women on a daily basis, and I say to them, the time is now to go to local media. I mean, if there was ever a time for them to want to listen to your story, it's now. So that is my greatest hope, and again, I feel like that will bring this whole thing full circle with a tipping point when the Times did a big article on waitresses just the other day,
Right.
I think it was yesterday. And so we're seeing this interest now trickle down, and I think that's incredibly important.
So your book, it seems like it's intended to reach out to a diverse group of women. And your tour, you focus more on college audiences, it seems. And I'm wondering why you chose the focus on your book tour of coming to colleges and what you hope to accomplish.
Because this is where it starts. Mm-hmm. And we have rampant sexual assault on college campuses, and the same myths apply to women who come forward with those claims as well. And that's why we have such a small percentage of women who muster up the courage to do that. And we have institutions that protect. So, not the victims. I wanted to make sure that I got my message to young people because this is when they're forming their ideas of how they treat the other gender with respect or not when they get into the real world. And I actually have been speaking at high schools as well, because I think that it's imperative to be with that age group as well. I spoke a couple weeks ago at an all-boys school.
Oh, wow.
And that's really where I should be investing my time.
How did that go? How did it go at the all-boys school?
You know what? It was fantastic. I wasn't sure what to expect, but you could hear a pin drop. And I thought, will they ask me any questions? And we actually had to cut it off because they had to go back to class.
Oh, wow.
So it was an amazing, great experience.
Yeah, wow. So you talked about your new position at Miss America, and I wonder, we at the Clayman Institute, we do a lot of work on producing change that advances gender equality, and I wonder if you have ideas about how you might influence Miss America or how you would like to see it.
Well, I can't expose all those ideas right here, right now. We're in the process of doing a tremendous amount of work and discussion, but I also have a board, and so we have to take votes on things. Yeah. But we've had some great forward-thinking meetings. I think one of the biggest hurdles we have to get over first and foremost is the messaging of the program. So I paid for my entire last year of Stanford from winning Miss America. It's a scholarship program. I was a classical violinist, as I said, as a child. It's the only reason I entered. My mom encouraged me to enter because it was 50% of my points. I had that talent already. So we need to re-message that part of it. We already have a great caliber of smart women, talented women who enter. But then the elephant in the room, of course, is a swimsuit competition. And so obviously I would not be bringing my Be Fierce movement to this organization unless I was giving some very serious thought to that. So I think you'll be very pleased with the direction that we are turning this organization into a full empowerment leadership organization for young women. And also very important, I want to mention that we will be making it more inclusive rather than exclusive for the type of woman, young woman who wants to learn how to be one of America's great leaders in the future.
So you call the book Be Fierce, and in the book you write about being a badass. And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit about what both of those things mean to you, Be Fierce and
Maybe
Be
we
Bad.
should ask my daughter. I hope I'm not too much of a badass as a mom, right? I am pretty disciplinarian though, right? Badass was actually a nickname that somebody gave me a long time ago, and it's really who I have always been. And I just hope to inspire other people to find your badass side. That's the whole part of this movement is giving people the empowerment tools to stand up and speak up for any injustice you're facing in your life. So it's not just about sexual harassment. It's about any way in which we feel like we've been put down in our lives. And we all have those experiences. So it starts young in school if you're bullied. And it gives you the skills to find the courage to speak up against that, right? It starts with sexual assault on college campuses. It starts with when you get into the real world, like when I got into the real world, and the first phone call I made was to my mom saying, "Mom, did you know that men and women aren't equal in the workplace?" I mean, it was amazing to me because I'd spent my childhood as a competitive violinist where they didn't give a rip if you were a boy or a girl. It was who played the violin the best. So it wasn't that I was naive. It was that it was absolutely urgent and earth-shattering to me that that was the reality, right? So this movement is about pay equity, but also women getting the promotions they deserve, women getting a seat in the boardroom. And as long as 94% of Fortune 500 companies are still run by men, we need men to put us in higher positions. Because guess what doesn't happen when you have more women in higher positions? Sexual harassment.
So the book to me also was really amazing in that it's really a story of strength and resilience. I mean, you know, you think you're going to read a book about sexual harassment and it's going to be gloomy and depressing, and there are those stories, but in the end, it's really about strength and resilience. And I just wonder how you've maintained your positivity through all you've been through writing the book and the stories you've heard.
Well, thank you for saying that, first of all, because that was really one of our biggest issues with writing the book, was that we had so many sad stories, and we didn't want it to be all depressing. And so we wanted it to be about moving forward. How do we solve this? So that's the back half of the book is mostly about how do we move this forward and solve it. And as far as being optimistic, listen, I have to be optimistic every morning when I wake up because this is the work that I'm doing now. And I wear this on my wrist every day and it says, be fierce. And in the morning I look at it, and some days, quite honestly, I wake up and I don't feel fierce. But immediately I have to change my mindset because there's just still a tremendous amount of work to do. And so I have to be optimistic in it. I've always been a goal setter and somebody who wants to achieve, and I just never thought that this would be what I'd be doing. But we got to keep moving the ball forward. We've had a tremendous amount of success with it, and I remain incredibly optimistic that we're going to get this bill passed. I remain incredibly optimistic that more and more women are going to come forward. I remain optimistic that companies are doing a lot of introspection right now and figuring out, have we really been serving our women correctly as employees? And how can we make it better for them? At least that's my hope.
So one more question from me, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But what would be the one piece of advice you would give people in the audience that want to help work to eradicate sexual harassment?
Stop being enablers and bystanders. I think that's the biggest piece. I mean, imagine, so much talk was given and time to the Trump Access Hollywood tape and Billy Bush. Imagine how different that scenario would have been if Billy Bush would have said something. I mean, I know it would have been so hard for him. It was his job, and I'm not giving him any excuses, and I really feel like he's now come out and moving in the right direction and writing op-eds about how he was an enabler. But that alone would have changed that one moment in time, right? And so imagine if we all collectively decide to do that, To me, that's the most important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for writing the book. I know it was very courageous to do so, I know, and I think it is really going to make a huge difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So we wanted to... So we wanted to allow time for Q&A with the audience. So let me tell you how this is going to work. If you're observant, you may have noticed there are 4 microphones placed in the 2 aisles. And so what we would ask you to do is, if you have a question, line up behind the microphones. And what I'll be doing is going from front to back, side to side, calling on you. And so here's the thing. I want as many people to get to ask a question as possible. So to make that happen, what I would ask is that you ask a question rather than make a speech, okay? And if you could ask your question as quickly as possible, that'll allow more people to get to ask the questions. So you were the first up. I will start with you.
Okay, hi. I'm a contributor to your book. Terry, how are you?
Hi, Terry.
She does write back in 5 minutes. I don't want to, okay, because maybe I can talk to you after, but I am so touched that she listened to my story. I hadn't told it in 15 years, and nobody believed me at my job. So I'm so touched that she did that. But the question I have is what to do now with all the passion. I'm one of the women that never got a chance to go back to my old business, and I've floundered. And I want to know if you see a new resurgence in jobs coming up, or where people like me who have this passion and desire can go to try to make it, to try to find work, or in this kind of arena, because it's the first time I've had a passion since I lost my career. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your bravery. And Terry was one of the women that I feature in the book. We had to change names in the book and professions and geographical area and all of that, not because I didn't believe Terry, but because I had to beware of the other person on the other side. You know, I really feel like there are more and more people that want to be involved in this mission, and two of them are sitting in the front row right here today. These two young women have started an organization called betterbrave.com, and I encourage you all to check it out. And they took it upon themselves to provide a clearinghouse for people to go and be able to be lined up with lawyers. And they're moving now into even a more broad area. So maybe you could speak to Terry. I'm sure that they would love to have you contribute to their efforts and their movement. And what I love about this is that these are young women who want to make a difference for their generation and beyond. And I mean, I did it for my kids and your kids, but then to see them want to step up and move this forward means a lot to me. So Terry, I hope you can be connected to them.
Do you two want to raise your hand just so that they can see where you're? Okay. Okay, question from the back over here then.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for prioritizing colleges, because I think sometimes when you're young and you see all of this happening and you're entering the workforce, you don't know what to make of it. So what would you say to young undergraduates right now who are inheriting the post-Me Too job market? Like, how do we continue this movement forward?
Speak up. Collectively form small groups within the workplace. Go to HR and speak collectively and say, you know, can we have an open discussion about the policies and arbitration clauses, if I haven't been successful with that. I think that knowing that you have power with your voice, especially now, is imperative. So one of my favorite quotes is, one woman can make a difference, but together we rock the world. And that's what we're seeing happening right now. But we have to all decide that we're going to collectively do it. And I think it's especially great for young people going into the workforce now, because they're being buoyed by all of this, right? It's just so much easier, but we have to act on it. So I think not to take a back seat to it, sit in the front and raise your hand and be active with it.
I love that advice throughout the book, the sort of doing things collectively together and the power that we have together. I think it's a great message.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I enjoyed your book very much, and
Thank
I
you.
applaud your efforts in doing this. I wish the audience here tonight were 50% men, but I don't
I
think
see
that's
my
the
fair
case.
share of men.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you
Anyway,
for coming.
my question has to do with your efforts towards Republicans, and particularly females who were Trump supporters and Trump voters. Have you sought out that group and tried to interact with them? I'm very curious as to how they would react. Thank you.
I get this question every time. Usually I get, how can President Trump not have consequences when other people have fallen? And the simple answer is that that's an elected office, and technically you vote somebody in or out of that job. But the one thing I have said about sexual harassment is that it's apolitical. And you really can't pick and choose which women you're going to believe simply by political party. So it's disingenuous for people who may have supported Trump to not acknowledge that he had more than a dozen women come out and say that he sexually assaulted or harassed them. The same could be said for if you like somebody in the other party and you don't want to believe those stories. Al Franken. So if we're really going to be honest about this issue, then we just have to believe women. That's the starting point. So I like to just take politics out of it. In fact, that's been my main message when I've been meeting behind closed doors with politicians for the last year and a half to try and get them on board with this bill. It's apolitical. And you know what ends up happening? If I'm meeting with male members of Congress, they end up telling me all the stories that their wives have told them. And then I say, well, don't you want to be a part of fixing this? Do you want to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history? Because in the end, both parties need female voters. Now, to answer your specific question about women who voted for Trump, the only way I can answer that, in again being an independent, is that I believe that a lot of people put policies over human decency. And I'm not faulting them for that. That's their personal decision. But I wrote an op-ed on it in the New York Times, if you want to go and look at it right after the election, that I felt that the lesson we should be giving our children is that human decency, not to use this word on purpose, but always trumps policy.
Question.
Thank you. Hi, Gretchen. We overlapped at Stanford. It's good to see you again. I serve on a national committee for diversity and inclusion for one of our Olympic sports. And with what you said about your violin studies being a meritocracy, I think sports is very much that way as well. I'm wondering what specific advice you might have for those of us that are looking to change this through sport as a vehicle for empowerment of women, but that particular mindset of the athlete and role models and things like that.
So specifically with female sports?
Female sport. Well, it could be young boys as well. The sport's played by both genders. So I'm just curious if there's any particular nuances for that mindset or a competitive meritocracy at young ages.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that video. Have you ever seen that video called Throw Like a Girl?
Yes, I love it. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, but the negative side of it is that when you show the 5- and 6-year-olds and you say to the boys and the girls, throw like a girl, and they both wind up like they're the major league best player of the year, right? Because they haven't been socialized yet. And then you show the 13-year-old boy and girl, and you say, throw like a girl. And both genders go, right? And make fun of it. So what happens in sport between 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and puberty, where we find it okay to make fun of throwing like a girl, right? And that's just one tiny example. So we have a lot of work to do in our parenting and our socialization of kids, which is what I was talking about earlier. But I actually think on the positive side, sports gives girls empowerment, right? Now we have to make sure they're paid equally. I'm thinking of soccer, right? Hockey, soccer, right. But how brave was it for the soccer players to say, we're not going to play. We actually make more money than the men, right? We win. So I think that sport gives women a tremendous amount of power. We have to make sure that we keep Title IX alive and all the opportunities for women to find that discipline like I did through music. And something I use every single day of my life now to keep me empowered.
Thank you.
Hi. How should society balance... Can you hear me? There we go. How should society balance believing women while also ensuring men that are accused are entitled to the due process? Because sometimes it feels like somebody will make an accusation and it feels like a witch hunt a little bit. And I feel like it's important that political and legal processes are respected in investigating allegations of wrongdoing.
I totally agree with you,
yeah.
Except if you have an arbitration clause, you don't get a legal process. So the problem with arbitration clauses is you give up your 7th Amendment right to a jury trial. So there is no legal recourse for you. So it makes it almost impossible to actually have a fair and open process, right? Because it's decided in secrecy in arbitration. Now, I do think that there is a case to be made for different levels of harassment and assault, and the stories that we've seen come out over the last 6 months are horrific allegations, and that's one part of it, but then we've had a much, I guess, more minor offense of somebody touching somebody inappropriately for a brief second. So we do have to have different degradations of what is harassment and what's assault. But let me just be clear that of the thousands of women who reached out to me, there wasn't a lot of gray area in their stories. That in even 2018, the stories were so egregious. They were incredibly black and white. So I want to be clear that I don't think this movement's going to turn into somebody filing a humongo lawsuit because a guy said to a woman in the workplace, "I like your dress." Okay, that's not what we're seeing. Just last year, I had a woman reach out to me where she asked for a promotion, and her boss asked her to get up on the desk and spread them. It was 2017. And I could go on and on and on. So I actually feel like that witch hunt argument is a cop-out. Everyone, yes, you need due process, but I would say that 99.99999% of the cases that have become public are true.
Hi, my name is Sydney. I'm a freshman here. A lot of the stories that I've been reading about the Me Too movement revolve around women who work in the hotel services industry, who work in the agricultural industry, and might not have the resources to open up about assault or the resources to navigate and understand the legal system, if they even have that at all, via like arbitration. So like, what are you doing to help deal with issues of harassment and assault, like with people who deal with other barriers, race, language, class, language barriers, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned earlier that I have funded the Gretchen Carlson Leadership Initiative, which is specifically for the exact women that you're talking about, who have no other place to turn and have no other way to get help. And I would say that at least half of the women who have come to my initiative so far across the country have been in those categories that you just described. In fact, at one of the last ones that we had in New York, we actually had interpreters there to help them. As I was speaking and everyone else was speaking, they were translating for all of the women who English was not their first language.
Hi, Gretchen. My name's Darby. Before I came to Stanford, I competed for Miss Tennessee in the Miss America organization. Mm-hmm. And when I got to Stanford, lots of people made fun of me as a pageant girl from the South, to the point where I stopped competing in the Miss America organization because I found it difficult to find my place as a feminist at Stanford and compete. Mm-hmm. So what do you have to say that I could say to people that are naysayers of the Miss America organization if I want to compete in the future?
Are you still eligible to compete?
I am.
Oh, great. Stick around for what I do for the program. But I totally understand where you're coming from, because after my experience, in fact, when I went to tell the dean here that I was stopping out to try and become Miss America, that was not necessarily the best answer I heard back. You're doing what? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But the bottom line is I also took it off my resume for years and years and years because it was just easier to not have to explain it. So again, it's a message. Our first goal is the messaging issue, and then the changes that we're going to bring to the program that I hope you will re-enter the pageant after you see what's going to happen this September.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darby.
Hi. I just wonder if at any point in your leadership conferences that you do, if you deal with women-on-women harassment. I come from a nursing background, so working with women who, very right or very left as far as breastfeeding, how long can you take off work? And I'm older now, but when I was younger and had young children, it was a difficult field to be in and to leave and to re-enter. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if that's something that comes up in your...
It does, and thank you, because I know it takes courage to ask that question. That is in the next phase of my work, because first and foremost, I'm trying to resolve the more predominant issue of men and women. But I'm well aware of the fact that women are also harassers to women. One of the things that I think makes that an issue is that so few women actually get to top positions. And then, as I write about in the book, they find themselves in a conundrum of, should I be in the boys' club or should I help the women below me? And it's this constant struggle. But I haven't done a tremendous amount of research in the question that you're asking. It is on my list of things to do because I realize that it does exist. And it's not just men harassing women. It's also women harassing women and men. So thank you for the question.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. I wonder if you're going to be able to tackle the big sport like the football or the, well, anyway, you have there, when you have in a football game, you always have the pom-pom girls, I would say. And, you know, you can see from my accent that I'm not from here. I came to this country 40 years ago, and I was really surprised at what happened. For the women, I think it's very demeaning, but the problem is that even at school, the young girls are actually pushed to really compete to those, and I'm defending my girls to do it.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. I watch football for the football. I happen to be a huge sports junkie. But yes, we do have certain positions for women that are not necessarily the most uplifting. Now, that's very different from competitive cheerleading, let me be clear, because that truly is a sport. But we have a lot of work to do in the messaging that we're giving to young women, and so I agree with you on that one. I'd rather only see the football game.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for all the questions, too.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.